right, welcome everyone to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, a little information for our guests and listeners. Here are your trigger warnings. We're going to be talking about horror culture, and horror movies, which could involve anything from murder, rape, suicide, child abuse, really effed up stuff. And in a moment, I'm going to say the actual word. So if you're not prepared for that, please go take a chill pill or medication or something, or talk to a friend. But if not, or if that's all good with you, then listen to us talk about murder, rape, and suicide and fucked up shit. Today's guest is Chris Alexander, former editor of Fangoria magazine, currently the editor of Delirium magazine, and director and producer with Full Moon, as well as the co-founder of the Canadian horror convention, Horror-Rama. Welcome, Chris. How you doing today?
Yes. I'm doing good, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, we lost him. Damn it.
No,
he's back in. Okay.
Yeah. Am I here? Okay, I'm doing good. I'm still doing good. I was doing good when you lost me, but I'm doing even better that I'm back. So I'm doing real well. All
right. Well, before we get started, is there anything you're currently working on that you want to tell us about before we get started?
Sure. Yeah, I just released the 25th issue of Delirium magazine, which is the magazine that I kind of rebuilt as I was winding down my tenure at Fangoria with my friend and partner Charles Band, producer Charles Band, director Charles Band. We have Roger Corman on the cover, and it's a great 40th anniversary salute interview I did with Roger while he was, he's 94, he's stuck in quarantine there in LA, and it's just as sharp as ever about his 1980. Speaking of rape, rapist tuna monster movie, Humanoids from the Deep. Mm-hmm. So there's that right now. If you go to fullmoondirect.com, you can buy that issue or subscribe if you're so inclined. I also just finished, I think it's my seventh feature film called The Girl with a Straight Razor, which is kind of a psychological giallo surrealist thing that I shot here during the pandemic and under very strict quarantine measures with only a handful of people, and it's probably the coolest thing I've done, I think. So I'm just in post on that now, and outside of that, I'm watching a lot of films and just existing in the world, which I'm very thankful for. So,
right,
yeah,
as are we all.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So in this interview, we'll be asking 3 sets of questions covering childhood, teenage years, and adulthood to find out what it is about horror that you like.
Cool.
The idea being that if we interview enough people, we might find some interesting common themes, also might find some unexpected ones, which would also be cool. Coming at the questions from multiple angles like that helps trigger memories in case you forget something. But that said, it's not meant to be a therapy session, so if there are any questions you don't want to answer, just say pass and we'll pass. But starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Since I always say this, since I have a memory, it's always been drawn to, horror, monsters, dark fantasy, rock and roll, weird stuff. But if I can chart it back to like a handful of influences, one, I should say that I was kind of raised around people that loved movies, and so it was always and loved weird stuff. My dad loved science fiction, and would let me stay up late at night and watch the Twilight Zone reruns with him, which was a huge deal for me. Huge. As a very, very young child, and also really encouraged me to explore music. I remember listening to Jimi Hendrix's Are You Experienced album with headphones
Good
on
album.
when I was like 3. I wasn't even in kindergarten or anything. And he would we'd listen to the song Third Stone from the Sun, and he would make up this whole narrative about these banshees that were coming from space, and I was just like, whoa. And I'm, it's such a psychedelic record, so I had the big cans on my head, and he would ask me to pick out the separation of the stereo and stuff. So really, really influential in sparking my imagination with media. And then he brought home this album in 1978, so I would have been 4. It was Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, narrated by Richard Burton. Yeah, it's a double disc progressive rock nightmare, with Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy and Justin Hayward from the Moody Blues, and narrated by Richard Burton. But if you've never heard it, you got to run right out. It's on Spotify. It's a night. It's like a living, breathing cinematic nightmare. And it's got a huge cult following in Europe. It never really landed here in North America. It actually has a stage show that toured for years in Australia and Europe. And so that blew my mind. And inside there was a book that had it was heavily illustrated by all these great painters, and they showed the destruction of Victorian London by the tripods, and people were being blown apart. And at the end, when the Martians die, it shows the birds have opened up their tripod helmets have fallen off, and the birds are like eating the blood from their brains, and I was like, oh my God, what am I looking at? So there was that, and just like you're terrified of this stuff, but you can't stop looking at it because your brain doesn't quite process what you're looking at. You can't quite figure it out. You shouldn't necessarily be looking at it because nothing on Sesame Street or it looks remotely like this. So this is something, and none of your friends have any point of reference to this stuff. So I don't know. It's very singular, the experience. Yeah. And then I went to the library and I was sifting through the records, and I found the cover of Kiss's 1977 record Love Gun, which, if you know that Ken Kelly painting, it's the 4 members of the band, and there's all these kind of like half-naked vampire ghost women swooning at their feet in this dungeon. And Gene Simmons has fangs and bat wings, and I didn't know what I was looking at, because I say this can't be music. What is this? It's like a monster comic. So Gene Simmons was my first vampire, and then I became obsessed with Kiss. And then I think the final grace note that really hit this whole fascination home was my grandmother took me to Clifton Hill, Niagara Falls, which is on the Canadian side of the falls, because I am Canadian. I'm from Toronto. And we went to the House of Frankenstein, which has been there since, I think, the 60s. And it's a wax museum. But once you enter it, you can't leave. So I would, again it'd be about 4. And we walk inside, and there's all this terrifying music and these heavy breathing sounds, and these like stalagmites hanging from the ceiling, and they're every time you step on something, it goes, and I wanted to leave, but I wasn't allowed. We had to walk through it, and I was in hell. I mean, I was terrified of this thing, but I don't even think I saw half the exhibits because I was hiding my face. But then when we left it, we finally, I see the exit sign, we race for it. Of course, my grandmother, my aunt are laughing their asses off. I'm dying. But we end up leaving, and here we are. We walk into the gift shop because, it exits through the gift shop. And
of course.
Yeah, and there's all this music playing, and there's like little snow globes. And everyone's kind of, very mundane and boring and looking at stuff. And I couldn't make the connection between what I literally had just walked through a door in another dimension, and here I now suddenly I'm in a completely different world. And it was that it was a dichotomy and that weird push and pull, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I became obsessed with Frankenstein, and because they bought me like a little flag that I could put on my wall, and I would have to hide it at night because I couldn't look at it. But as soon as I woke up, I'd put it right back on the wall. And then that was it, man. And then I discovered Fangoria, and I used to like hide that in other magazines and comic books. Oh, yeah. And comic books too. That was a big deal too. Marvel comic books, and the Incredible Hulk, I'll even cite as like one of my first monsters for sure. And so that kind of like loving Marvel, the early Marvel stuff, you're also kind of humanizing the monster. I really liked that idea that these superheroes were kind of like hiding these alter egos that were kind of out of control. And I love that whole concept. So it was that kind of stuff all bubbling around, and then I guess there's a couple more things. I mean, I guess I first saw my first actual horror movie. I didn't know what it was. Turned out years later I found out it was The She-Beast, starring Barbara Steele from 1966, directed by Michael Reeves, who would later go on to direct Witchfinder General and then die. But there was an opening scene where Barbara, or at least a stunt double, as the witch, is being dipped and tortured in this ravine, and she's screaming, and her face is all like haggard. That was terrifying. And again, I didn't know what it was because we changed the channel, and I was just like, "What?"
wait, go back. What was that?
Yeah, what was that? And no, we can't go back because whatever that is not for you. And of course, as is the human condition, when you tell a kid, especially, this is not for you, of course, all they want to do is see what they're not supposed to see.
But of course.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you saw that?
Oh, that was, again, this is around between 3 and 5. So all this stuff was happening around this time. And outside of that, it was encouraged. I mean, my uncle, who's mentally handicapped, but very savant-like in the sense that he could do 10,000 piece puzzles in a day. But he would collect. He was a collector, so he had all the Mego dolls, he had all the monsters, all the models, the Aurora model kits. He had comic books, Viewmasters, and all that. And he would immaculately presented in his room like a museum. And so I had access to all this cool stuff that I could touch and experience. And then the last thing that was it. Point of no return. I had a Batman comic. I don't know what issue it was, but again, this is 1978, so it was 4. And there was he was fighting a guy named the Blockbuster on the cover. I don't know. Anyways, I never really liked DC, but I had this Batman comic. And I flipped it over, and there was a print ad for the Philip Kaufman remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And that original teaser poster, which is so cool, has the silhouettes of the 4 heroes running. And then underneath, their shadow looks like kind of these like elongated roots that are coming into the ground and bleed into the title treatment. And again, I was like, whoa, I don't know what this is, but this looks cool. And so I wanted to see this movie. And it was only PG, but again, I wasn't allowed to see horror films in the theater. No one would take me. So I had to wait till it came on TV a year later. And my parents went out to go see Apocalypse Now, I remember, in the theater. Because again, I was like, what are you seeing? Apocalypse Now? What is this? No, you won't like it. It's boring. It's a war movie. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of talking.
Yeah, but they stuck me home with the babysitter, and they said, listen, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, all he can talk about is the world premiere of this Invasion of the Body Snatchers thing on TV. You cannot let him watch that. My baby says, no problem. She ends up,
of course, you watch it anyway.
Yeah, she ends up falling asleep. I had one of those remote controls with like, those push-button remote controls from the 70s that are with a cord that... So I knew
the ones that make that loud clang noise.
Good chunk, and you had a little band on the left side that you'd have to go up. You had 3 choices. Anyways, I knew exactly where the Toronto station was that was playing this, and as soon as she fell asleep, my opportunity came, and I put on the channel just in time to see Donald Sutherland
put the thing under a pillow so you could change the channel.
Well, he was like smashing his own clone's face in, and that's like that's a PG movie.
Oh God, that's the scene that you popped in on. Like
right then. Perfect. And there's that sound of that fetal heartbeat going, whoa, 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 whoa. And so I see that, and it's like, again, that for a PG movie, even now, it's surprisingly dark and gory. A lot of stuff was in the 70s. They got away with a lot of stuff being PG.
Yeah.
I mean, PG back then was a lot more lax.
Yeah, as long as there wasn't a lot of swearing and a lot of sex. I mean, the PG was pretty much for. I mean, I remember seeing Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which is the most nihilistic of the 5. And at the end, the big shootout with the mutants, and everyone gets blown away, and there's blood flying everywhere. Charlton Heston gets riddled with bullets, and then his last thing is his bloody hand hits the nuke button to blow up the planet, and then it literally blows up, and the narrator says, "That's it. It's all over. The little star has been obliterated." And then I remember at the end of it, there's not even any credits. It would just come up rated G. I'm like, rated G?
What?
Those movies were rated G. Like, they thought, it's kid stuff, right? Like, holy shit.
Yeah, again, as long as there's not a lot of cursing or sex, then, we can talk about completely apocalyptic and nihilistic views of
concepts
the end of the world.
Right. I mean, these are the concepts that kids were exposed to back, which I think it's great, but...
I mean, fair point, though. I mean, 50s and 60s and 70s, you're having, the... crap! What the hell? Duck and cover stuff in the schools.
Yeah, it was. You're right. It was the zeitgeist. It was like, and again, we always talk about the 70s being, what was on the 6 o'clock news was far worse than what could be seen at the multiplex. Although the violence of the war was in your living room, so a bunch of talking apes blowing up the planet means nothing. And so that was the formative childhood years that set it all in stone, and literally nothing has. I'm 46 now. Not much has changed. I mean, a lot has changed, but that passion has only gotten, surprisingly, a lot of kids put that stuff on the shelf, maybe because they're conditioned to, but I've never put that stuff away. I've made my living based on that undying passion for the weird and arcane when it comes to the arts.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you had a almost instant affinity towards horror. We typically have like one of 3 different types of results in these sessions, and one is didn't like horror, thought it was scary when I was very young, then later on progressed into it. One is kind of middle ground, and the third being those that just from the very beginning are like, I don't know what this is. It kind of frightens me a little, but it's coupled with a definite, I like this. Whatever it is, I like it.
Well, I think there's that old expression, your perspective on the ride depends on when you get on the train, but some people get on the train at different points, and I think you have to be some people, if they're not, I mean, again, I was in an environment where like kind of looking at this stuff and talking about movies and, you know, not just horror movies, but all movies. I mean, I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sundays with my mother, and we'd watch I remember watching Citizen Kane when I was really, really little, and that's what we would do as a family. So a lot of families don't have that kind of, you know, parents tend to really, really hide the weird stuff from their kids, which tends to almost universally backfire in their faces when they come of age and are allowed to make their own decisions. They tend to go all in. But with me, it was always just.
Sorry, were your parents teachers?
Not at all. No, not at all. They weren't. No, they're just heavily into, you know, they're from the '60s. They were heavily into, you know,
drugs,
rock and roll. I don't even think. No, you know what? I think my dad, you know, because I never really experimented with drugs, believe it or not. I never needed them. I said that if a good film or a good piece of music took me to places, I wouldn't have to artificially trick myself into being in. But I think my dad was probably into hallucinogens to some degree, but they certainly loved music and film, and they was very passionate about. And I remember when John Lennon was shot, it was like, I was very little. I was like, who's John Lennon? And so they're incredibly passionate about rock and roll and media. So not teachers, but I mean, what's a teacher? A teacher is anyone who
they taught you.
They did, yeah, they did. So yeah, but not officially, no.
So looking back over these things that you were talking about, you know, you mentioned both excitement and fear. What excited you about these things?
I think it was always, David Cronenberg said, the moment you lose your true innocence is when you realize you're going to die. And I think watching these movies, I realized about death. I mean, I realized that we had these weird squishy things inside us, which I didn't even know we had. So I was like, what's all this? And then you start really being haunted by these cosmic concepts about, you know, how precarious we are. These like kind of moving bags of fluid and gushy stuff that could be like decimated in one breath. But yeah, I think the real idea about death really upset me. I mean, I think I'm still upset by it. I still haven't made peace with it.
What about it upset you?
Well, the whole how everything finite, and then you know, my own. I have 3 sons myself, and my middle son said this to me a couple of years ago. I think it hit him, and I remember when it hit me too. It's cold. It's a cold feeling when you have that. Holy shit! What happened to be? Where was I before I was here? And you're like, well, you were nowhere. I was nowhere. Well, what will happen to me after I'm gone? It's like, well, we don't know, but it's very, very possible that you'll return to being nowhere. That was a lot to take in. You certainly couldn't go to school and bring these subjects up when they're trying to teach you reading, writing, and arithmetic. So, yeah, I would turn to films to kind of like explore these ideas in a very childish way, but also have a lot of fun with it. So there was that kind of burgeoning, I won't say intellectualism, but certainly trying to make sense of the world I was in and what I was as a human being. Even though I wasn't aware of that, that was certainly part of it. And then the other part was simply the fantasy element of it. You know, taking and distorting the human face to be. I remember watching. Okay, in 1981, so I was 6 or 7, I guess. I remember Empire Strikes Back was playing in the theater, but also American Werewolf in London was playing.
Oh.
And my dad, God bless him, you know, I had Star Wars toys, but no one ever bought me like any of the characters, so I had like 10 Imperial Guards, so I would pretend there were other things.
Yep.
So I didn't know what these characters did, but I thought the ships were cool, the aesthetics were cool. Anyways, we bought a ticket to see Empire Strikes Back, but we had seen a clip on television of the part of the werewolf transformation, the Baker's werewolf transformation, and I was like, whoa, and my dad was like, whoa. So God bless him, totally irresponsible, but we bought the ticket for Empire and we walked into the next theater at the Westwood Theater in Toronto and watched American Werewolf in London. And I was super, super young. And it's so funny, I watch it now and it's like, my kids have seen it and I fast forward through the sex scenes and stuff, but I didn't. Not then, I didn't. And it didn't bother me. Wasn't like uncomfortable because I really didn't know what the hell was happening. But that movie, you know, changed everything for me. I mean, oh my God, you know, what an incredible motion picture. So the whole idea of the special effects and how a man could literally grow into a creature like that before your eyes, it's basically falling in love with the magic trick. You know, how did they do this? So that fascination with the mechanics of that was a huge part of it. And then when I discovered Fangoria, about 2 years later, then that was a free space where you could really see the wizard behind the curtain. And then there was no turning back.
It was kind of interesting. So I had asked you, I had intended to ask you two different questions. I was going to ask you what excited you about this stuff, and then I was going to ask you what scared you about this stuff. But when I asked you what excited you, half of the things that you listed were things that scared you.
There's a little both.
Yeah, definitely. Hand in hand, for sure.
Let's see. As far as social element goes, you had a father and an uncle who were pretty well into this, as well as your mom that, liked film in general, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I should also mention I didn't go to kindergarten. I didn't go to junior kindergarten. I went to my great grandmother's. It was this my granny wedding, my British granny, and she was huge into monsters. I forgot about that, and she was also into soap operas. And at that point, ABC had started rerunning Dark Shadows, and so every day at lunch, we would. She'd already gone through the cycle of it in the early '70s, but we would watch Dark Shadows every single day.
Cool. Did you have any? Did any of this stuff trigger any, fears that you didn't have, or anything that changed how you approached life?
I used to be scared because I mentioned Kiss, that love gun. I used to be when I first found out that they existed, and then I was told that they were real. I used to have nightmares that they would come like ghosts through my ceiling vents in my condominium. I'd wake up screaming, and then I had to be cuddled back to sleep and reassured that Kiss is not coming to get me. Which is really funny to me now, because now I'm quite close with both Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, which is one. Nice. I produced 4 Kiss magazines for them, and still my favorite band of all time.
I'm hoping you told them this story.
Well, yeah, but me and everybody else, everyone, there's such a fan base that everybody's had some kind of story. But back, who would have known? Like 40 years later, I would have been sitting in their living rooms. It's crazy. Life is crazy. But that was a huge thing. I'd be definitely scared of that. But and I would have nightmares. I had all kinds of reoccurring nightmares, but it never pushed me away from wanting to experience this stuff. I used to be so obsessed with, throughout my entire young life, before VCRs and everything, I would get the TV guide, and what I would do is I'd get my highlighter and I'd highlight anything that said horror, like a movie that was labeled horror in the TV guide. Mm-hmm. And I had a Leonard Maltin video book, I think, a little bit, maybe that was a little bit later. But I remember later on with my Maltin book when I was like 10, it's again, no IMDb, no internet, and I had to rely on Leonard Maltin for reviews. And I memorized every title, every alternate title, running times, if it was color, black and white, made for TV, whatever. But I would notice that if Maltin gave it like 3 or 4, if he gave it 4 stars, it was going to be really good. If he gave it 2.5 or 3, it could be a dodgy proposition. If it was a horror movie and he gave it a bomb, it was going to be amazing. So I would make sure, like it's true, like Lucio Fulci's Zombie was a bomb, and even The Brood, Cronenberg's The Brood was a bomb. And so I would highlight anything that was bomb or 1 star. If it was 1 star, I knew it was going to be really down market, really foreign, and really weird. And I would hide an alarm clock under my pillow when I was like asleep, like a tiny little battery-operated alarm clock. Felt like it took a AA battery. And I'd wake myself up at key times and sneak downstairs and sit in front of the television and watch that film on low volume. And of course, if I heard a creak upstairs, I'd have to turn it off and sit there in the fucking dark and wait until the creak subsided, and I knew that no one was going to come and yell at me for being up in the middle of the night. And then I turn it back on, and that added to the weird, stress of watching these movies. It was,
of course,
it was, but it was addictive. It really was like kind of. I said I never really experimented with drugs. Who needed it? This was a kind of natural, weird drug that I was high on. Was exploring this stuff, and again, it was so singular because no one else I knew was into it. So it was a journey of. It was a one man's journey, and it was really personal and really cool.
Yeah.
I just want to back up 1 second. So when we mentioned or asked if you had any, if it triggered any fears other than this Kiss vampire thing, which I'm guessing went away at some point, but there was no lasting phobias.
No, the Kiss vampire thing went away as soon as I got, I think, Dynasty, 1979's Dynasty out of the library, and actually listened to what the Kiss was, and I was quite disappointed that it was just rock and roll. I was like, oh. I thought it was going to be like screaming and monsters yelling and growling. and scary music, and it was just like happy, upbeat rock and roll. It's like, oh,
Right.
no, there was no lasting. I used to have terrifying. When I saw Dawn of the Dead, again, I was 10. That was another huge turning point, because the epic scope of it, the whole idea, the kind of, almost operatic way it's presented, where it spans quite great period of time, and it's the end of the world, and it's apocalyptic, and also Savini's insane gore effects, were the disemboweling just did me in. And something about that movie really, 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 really fucked me up. And I had, for a whole year, I had night terrors when I would get up and wake up in other rooms crying. And I was terrified. But I think it was the whole idea that, again, tied into death. But now the whole idea that your granny or your mom or your cousin are going to die, and that sucks. But it's even worse, they're going to wake up. And then when you go to hug them, they're going to like rip your neck out. I mean, that really, really disturbed me. So Dawn of the Dead left an indelible impression on me. It's my favorite horror film of all time, but it certainly was one of the few that I can cite that had a real, like, not negative effect on me, but really upset me.
I don't want to dig too much, but just trying to understand what you mentioned about the dreams. What I'm trying to understand what it was that upset you about them. It was. Have you ever
had night terrors before? They're kind of you can't. I think that you can't really pin down or articulate what it is about it. You wake up and you just don't even really understand why.
Well, that's what I was about to ask, because I was going to say, was there a common theme, or was it just random different stuff all the time?
It definitely dreams about zombies. I mean, I was definitely afraid of him being chased and stalked and devoured, but also, again, it was the idea that people that we know, that were the uncanny, what's familiar is also alien, and so there's somebody that but they're looking at you, they don't see you, they see you as something else, they see you as prey, and it was that idea that I couldn't quite figure out in my mind or make peace with, and that really got under my skin. So this caused this almost full year of dread and anxiety when I went to sleep. And then, of course, as these things tend to do, when you have enough of them, you're afraid to go to sleep because you almost will yourself to have them again. Right. You psych yourself into it. So it was about a year of that. And then suddenly it just stopped. That was it. It was over. And then you move on. And then I discovered Lucio Fulci's The Gates of Hell, aka City of the Living Dead. And about a year later. And that kind of did me in a different way, because it was so surreal.
How old were you when that happened?
That was when I was 12. So when I was 12, it became more of a communal thing. I think that's what it was.
Yeah. Was that when you had more friends and more of a group to watch the films with, so it wasn't so much a singular journey, like you said?
Well, what I would do, and I've always been kind of like the Pied Piper during this period, because there really wasn't a community of horror fans my age. I mean, we weren't acknowledging it. On Halloween, we'd love to dress up, but there wasn't a lot of that. But I would have a briefcase.
Well, I'll tell you what, if this is possibly moving into teenage years, let's hold off on that for a second, because you actually touched on something I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, okay.
Talking about all this stuff was, how did this affect your Halloween?
Halloween, even to this day, I'm not a big fan of Halloween, because here's my problem with Halloween. No, okay. Here's my problem with it. It's like the Addams Family or the Munsters. What's special about Halloween when every day is that day for you? But I think my lip curls up a little bit in that, loving this stuff, and even in some members of my own family, I was looked down upon. Like, something's wrong with them, and teachers and polite society, but thinking that there's something wrong with a kid who is, obsessed with Dracula and Frankenstein and zombies and all that stuff. But suddenly, on October 31st and the weeks leading up to it, it's perfectly okay to cover yourself in blood and to run around and be as scary and disgusting as you want and watch horror movies and everything else. It's okay because everybody's doing it. And then suddenly, November 1st, that stuff is back in the box, and then it's you're a sick human being if you love it again, And I always hated that. I never understood it. I always pushed against it because it didn't make any sense to me why the hypocrisy of it. I hate it. So even to this day, Halloween's fun, it's great, but I mean, I live in a house with my 3 kids, and it's, we got vintage pinball machines, and we got monster statues, and we got all kinds of crazy stuff here. So literally every single day of our life is that. So there's nothing particularly. Our Halloween happened this year. It was, in Toronto here, all quarantined and locked down, but it didn't change anything for us because every day is like this for us. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it didn't really. I mean, I liked it at the time when I was a kid because other people were suddenly on the same page with me, and we could have fun. And then are we allowed to move into teenage years now? Or are we not quite there yet?
Let me take a quick scan through the questions that I have written down.
We covered nightmares, influences.
The only other real question would have been if there was anything that actually terrified you as a child.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too into the guts of it. No one wants this to turn into the Oprah Winfrey show, but yeah, my parents I had an idealistic childhood until I was about 10, and then something internally happened with my parents. It all fell apart, and it was I'll be honest, it was a pretty harsh few years there where there was battle royal. And so the kind of stuff I witnessed and had to experience during those times was infinitely more upsetting than the fantasy. The fantasy was the escape. That's where you went to kind of like run away from this stuff and try to make more sense of it and see something that was much more interesting than what you were dealing with. So as far as movies go, yeah, I mean, Dawn of the Dead, The Night Terrors, all that stuff. But there was nothing that I saw that at that point of my life. In the early days, yes, Frankenstein. I told you the House of Frankenstein, and Body Snatchers. But there was nothing at that point when I was like 9, 10 that was pushing me away from the genre at all. I was all in, and I wanted to be scared. It becomes like everyone always tells you, it's like chasing the dragon. You have that first sip, and you just keep wanting to go there. So and then once you get conditioned, you get scared, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm done with that baby stuff. Now I want the next level, and so you're always trying to level up.
Yeah. To stop for a second, I don't think we did such a great job of explaining this at the start of the call, but one of the reasons that we're doing this podcast is exactly something you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is, a lot of mainstream society does look at people who are fans of horror and think, you're kind of weird. And my background, Chris is more the horror fan. I'm more the psychology buff. My background has always been people make sense. You don't always understand what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're doing. But if you can dig down into it, you'll get to a point where you'll understand why they're doing what they're doing. Sure. And we don't know if there being any good dissection of why it is that horror fans love horror the way they do. Like maybe there's some clinical document written by doctors somewhere, written in some obscure jargon that we've never heard of. But, that was part of the reason that we wanted to do this, was to give horror fans an opportunity to lay on the couch a little bit and talk about some of these deeper things as a way of getting at the deeper understanding that then explains why it makes sense.
Well, I mean, there was a friend of mine who made a documentary called Why Horror, and a lot of people, the Carpenter I was in it, but I always took not issue with it, but I always wonder at the end of the day, it's like, well, why are you asking why? I think it's like, either you're in or you're not. I mean, it's kind of like, you can look in the mirror all you want, all you'll see is yourself staring back, and eventually you go, and you will make peace with it and walk away. But I think it really at the end of the day, to me, I think the why is very simple. It's the same reason people were telling ghost stories around campfires in the caveman times, scratching stuff on walls, and is that the same reason why religion exists. I'm sorry if you're religious. I'm not a fan of organized religion. I think these were stories to kind of explain away the mysteries and the anxieties of our lifespans and the mysteries of the universe. And I think that's why we gravitate towards this stuff, because it is bigger than what we see. And it does ask bigger questions, even if it's something as rudimentary about life and death, and sex, and those are the 3 real mysteries, anyways. Yeah, that's why we do it, and we do it for one reason: we become addicted to it because the people that really love this stuff are fixated on these questions, these bigger questions. I'd argue that a lot of horror fans are somewhat intellectual because they are out trying to figure out stuff, but they are digging a little deeper, and we watch this stuff, I think, to have some control over it.
Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, it's really multiple different sides. There's there is the quest to find out unanswered questions, but there's also, like you were mentioning before, just your first experience with seeing Invasion of the Body Snatchers. To me, one of the first things that develops that interest and that draw to all things dark and horror is just the visual element of it too. If something is just very well done, very well drawn, very well sculpted, very well put together with lighting and just the imagery of it, just that first glance of it draws you in because it's good shit. It's made very well.
I would quickly say too that, you know, when we're talking about the why and you kind of almost alluded to saying who cares. Well, there's two reasons for that. One, to be able to hand something to mainstream media and go, here's why, and it makes sense. And also, you know, there are other people even inside the horror industry and fan culture that maybe you don't personally care about digging into it, but like I said, I'm a bit of a psychology buff, and I'm sure that there are other people who are both horror fans and psychology buffs at the same time who might find some interest in it. And, you know, you mentioned, for example, being addicted to or fixated on some of these questions and having some control over either the outcome or understanding of the answers. You know, we've probably talked to about 25 people now, and it's really interesting that there's quite a lot of different reasons, and there's not a lot of overlap yet. We've had people who liked horror because of rebellion. Some of them are fixated on these questions. Some of them, it's primarily because of a close familial relationship with somebody in their family. There's other words that aren't coming off the top of my head, but there's actually a couple different good reasons.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere. I think that's another thing is that you know, I said your perspective on the ride depends on when you get on the train, but the love of this stuff, certainly the love of anything is subjective, and it hits you when it hits you, and your reasons for, you know, that the coded entry into your psychology is definitely personal. There's no one unlocking mechanism, that's for sure. Right. But I think the blueprint of it is at the end of the day, it's you know, when I discovered what the Freudian id was, I understood the genre even more and why we are attracted to it. Mm-hmm. Because all those, what do you mean? All those base impulses that drive us, you know, all those things that are we as a society try to push down. We try to pretend that they're not here, and that perverts our sexuality. That you know, that I think does a great disservice to a lot of the natural things that drive us, our base instincts. Yeah. And horror kind of gives us that free space to,
particularly in American culture, anyway.
Well, American, but not necessarily. I mean, it's a Judeo-Christian, I think. But we push this stuff down, but horror kind of gives us a license to explore that, and that's why you know, horror is primarily does so well with teenagers and has historically done so well with young people. Is that that's they've been told not to talk about these things, you know, don't swear, don't do this, don't talk about, you know, sex. No, we're not going to tell you about sex. We're not, you know, all this stuff. And suddenly they can go and, oh, what's this? Oh, wow, whoa. Yeah.
It's like a safe creative outlet for the macabre and taboo.
Right. Then they can go, yeah, wow, okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's all it is, really. It's a perversion of our id. And, you know, and the monsters, too. I mean, when you have a dream, your brain's still working, so it's the natural world, but you're not in control of it anymore, and you wake up and you're like, what was that all about? Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of the great, again, when I saw Rick Baker's American Werewolf in London transformation, where that face was suddenly being pulled and distorted into something else, I mean, it hits you because you've had dreams like that where a face is not a face, a staircase isn't a staircase, and suddenly it's happening before your eyes. And so all that subconscious stuff is suddenly realized in the real world, and it's wild.
One of my favorite authors, which I've brought up on this podcast before, is Professor Joseph Campbell, who said something that I really liked about dreams. He said that the language of dreams are symbols. It's symbolism, but it's the same thing with religion, that religion and dreams both use a lot of the same symbols, but the translation is slightly different because what some of the symbols might mean to us might be slightly different than what those symbols mean to society at large. Like, for example, symbol Superman. You might have a dream about Superman, but you could interpret that symbol 100 different ways.
I've never had a dream about Superman. I can honestly say that. Yeah. but now,
use that as an example.
But now we are talking about probably will tonight.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how they work.
That's how it works.
Yeah. So, okay, moving into teenage years. You mentioned this Fulci movie.
Yeah, so I think when I was 12, I was grade 7, and what I would do is I'd started a new school, and every time you start a new school, you can kind of reinvent what you are because there's no memory with anybody where you've come from.
Starting over a new chapter.
Right. So it's like, well, this is my stuff. This is what I do. So I can come on real strong with this and be very announced to the world and say, I want to see something. And there's that Twilight Zone, the movie where Dan Aykroyd's like, want to see something really scary? And I was like, well, I'm going to do it. I'm all in. So I had my dad's old briefcase from his real estate days, and I packed it full of Fangorias and horror comics. And I'd get on that school bus because I took a school bus, and I went right to the back.
The teacher called home.
Well, no, the kids are just like, who's this motherfucker? I was new. And I would just open the briefcase and start pulling out these early Fango magazines, the Great Uncle Bob period, God rest his soul. And, all the guys were like, whoa, let me see, what's this? Oh, my God, brains falling out. And all the girls would be like, ew. But, of course, the girls want to come over and see it, too, because they're just like, whoa. But at the end of the day, every single person on that bus, whether it be a jock or a geek or whatever, we're all like, who the hell's this guy? I became a kind of smut peddler to a lot of these.
First one's free, kid.
They all knew, and then it really caught on because I'd be in class, and I didn't make no bones of the fact. Every assignment we do, I tie it back to something. And I was an encyclopedia by that point. I knew stuff that most established people wouldn't know. Again, running times, like deep cut filmmakers. I was into Paul Naschy. I found a Paul Naschy late at night movie called Dracula's Great Love, and I was telling him about these Spanish horror films and Hammer movies. And so, some teachers really kind of dug it because they could clearly see I was articulate and passionate about something that even if they didn't like it, they'd be like, wow. And then everybody else, suddenly you're like, again, Pied Pipering, a lot of people that had a vague, abstract interest in it. Suddenly you had a circle of friends, of people that really wanted to follow you down this rabbit hole. So we used to have sleepovers, at this point, where we'd
like movie nights?
Yeah, we'd see Nightmare on Elm Street 3 at that point. It was new. And one of the cool things we thought was really a key to staying up all night was Patricia Arquette eating spoonfuls of instant coffee and watching cola. So we would do that. We would get super hopped up on caffeine by literally eating it. And coffee, like ground coffee.
It's not the same as they show in the movies, is it? You think it's going to be easy? You just take a spoonful of coffee, this is fine, and then
I can still taste it. It's like eating a cigar.
I can still feel it in my teeth. It is the worst experience ever.
It is instant. You're instantly dehydrated. Like whoop, you're like the mummy.
It's like the cinnamon test. Just God.
But it worked. Like your eyes were bulging. So we'd pull the
wakes you up.
And we would pull the all-nighters, and so it became this communal thing. And then on Mondays, the next day, it'd be like, "Whoa!" Well, we would just rent. It was my recipe. We'd rent? One of our guys would want to rent like a Friday the 13th. By that point, I was really bored by that stuff. I'm like, okay, we do that. Then we got to go and randomly pick something. Usually, if it was in a big box, I knew it was going to be cool.
Oh yeah,
big box like it was all European stuff, down market stuff. So we grabbed one of those, and we just pulled these all-nighters, and one of them was Gates of Hell, because I'd seen a photo of it in a Fangoria magazine of the girl barfing her guts out. And that just did me in, because it was just taking the art of gore to another level, but also dressed with all this kind of progressive rock, and I love prog rock, so it was like, wow, this is like a visceral experience. It's like bypassing my intellect and hitting me right in the intestines, and I love this stuff. So that was a huge thing. And then, that was the golden age of the video store. So my dad and I, every Friday night, we'd rent horror movies too. And he'd always fall asleep and leave me to my devices. And one of those movies was like Lamberto Bava's Demons that really did me in as well.
Wait, did you just say Lorena Bobbitt's Demons was a warm memory?
I said Lamberto Bava, but we can get into Lorena Bobbitt later.
I'm sure she has some demons.
Definitely.
Okay.
But it's like my those are warm memories, of friendship, and my father who passed away in my arms a couple of years ago was my best friend. him just falling asleep like a son of a bitch and leaving me alone on this couch. But it was cozy, you know, like I was with my dad, you know, I was watching this stuff. So I was kind of alone, but I wasn't alone. And and the old man and I would make deals with each other. I'd say, like, I remember one night the Omega Man was on. And I already knew what I Am Legend was. I hadn't read it yet, but I read all about it.
You knew of it.
Yes, I'd read about it, and I knew the different film. I knew The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, and I wanted to see the Omega Man. He said, "That's cool." He goes, "Well, we'll stay up and watch the Omega Man, but first we got to watch Ben-Hur." I'm like, "Oh man!" But we did. Man, to this day, Ben-Hur is one of my. Yeah, but I love Ben-Hur. I thought it was.
Wasn't that like 4 hours?
Especially on television, it was like 4 hours
with commercials.
Now, thankfully, we had to abandon the last act, but we had at that point had a VCR so we could tape the Omega Man, and I'd watch or tape the rest of Ben-Hur, and I'd watch the Omega Man live. But you know, again, the Heston double bill, it was great, and again, to this day, Heston's one of my favorite. Planet of the Apes, obviously, a huge influence on it. So,
oh yeah,
Heston's one of my favorite actors. But all that stuff at that point is tied to a very kind of, again, horror prior to that was a very I was like God's Lonely Man. I was like Bill Bixby at the end of The Incredible Hulk walking off to the sunset. But but at that point, it was more communal. There's much more of a feeling of camaraderie at that early parts of my teenage years.
Yeah. Like 3 points that I take away from what we just discussed as far as your teenage years was one, glad to hear the response and the reception that you got from high school, because I started to think, like, when you first started talking about it, that man, it's gonna suck because you're gonna be this new kid in a new school and you come in with all this cool horror culture stuff and all the normies are like, oh, you're weird, we don't like you. But it sounds like you had a really good reception from most of the kids, and then those that weren't necessarily horror fans started to get drawn into it with the Pied Piper effect anyway. So
yeah, I never had because I was very articulate and defiant. Like, you couldn't. It was like crossing swords with Zorro. Like, I think teachers just knew. Like, it's like, well, I'm not going to go to battle with this guy because he's ready. He's ready to go.
Yeah,
he'll defend. He'll die on this hill. He'll defend this.
Exactly.
And so, and I never had a problem. I was always kind of my own guy. I had my own vibe, but I never had an issue not having. I was never like ostracized. You know, everybody kind of, if they didn't like me, didn't want to hang out with me, they respected that whatever I was doing, there wasn't anything to compare me to. So it was kind of like I was at peace with everybody. I got along with everybody. So it was
great.
Pretty good. Yeah, it was a pretty good run.
Yeah. And the other two things were that, it sounds like you had another great experience with horror in general in your teenage years, and the fact that you had not only the social group with all your friends at school, but you also had you had movie nights with them and also movie nights with dad. So, I mean, it's just like
double whammy.
Totally.
Yeah, right.
And then I had my mom wasn't a huge horror movie nut, but I had movie nights with her too, where we'd watch other stuff, and she'd kind of put up with my interest. I mean, you know, my mom actually, I love giallo films. You know, I love Italian horror, and I credit her with that love of that stuff, because she turned me on when I was a kid to Miami Vice. Which may sound funny to you, but Miami Vice, if you look back on that stuff, I wasn't allowed to watch Dukes of Hazzard because my mom thought it was too redneck, too cracker. And I had the toys, but I didn't know who they were. I had Boss Hogg. I thought he was the hero. I didn't know.
Meanwhile, I was not allowed to watch Miami Vice.
Well, I see Miami Vice, so we'd stay up every Friday night, and it was on at like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And I'd watch Miami Vice. And if you watch that show, it's, you know, they'd throw music. That thing was wall-to-wall music.
Oh, yeah.
And there was one particular episode, I forget the name, Little Miss Dangerous, I think it's called. Yeah, because it's the Ted Nugent song, Little Miss Dangerous.
Okay.
But it's one of the ones where Tubbs is the hero, and he falls in love with this female serial killer. And at the end of it, when they realize that Tubbs is banging this killer, Crockett gets into the spider, and he zooms off into the night while the PIL's the order of death. This is what you want. This is what you get. Well, a lot of people that remember it as part of the movie Hardware, but years before, it made its debut on Miami Vice, and it played the song in its entirety as the killer tied Tubbs up in the middle of the night and was dragging a knife across him. And meanwhile, Crockett is racing through the dead streets of Miami in his black car while this song is... Anyways, and then she blows her own brains out at the end. It was basically like a Dario Argento movie that he never directed. And so my mom turned me on to all that stuff, and that was great. So... yeah, really great memories during all this time. And again, I mentioned the video store. It really was, for younger listeners out there, it really was an amazing time when you could walk into this, especially if you had like one of those superstores, like a Bandito video or a Jumbo video, and they had the designated horror section that sometimes was built to look like a castle or something, and there were so many players out there at the time releasing everything, some of it authorized, some of it not.
So a lot of positive reinforcement.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed. Great time. I have the happiest movie life growing up, totally.
Well, let's jump into adulthood then. So what are some of your biggest influences in your adult life in horror then?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think, to me, the older I get, I was a publicist for a while at Warner Brothers Films too. To me, the very word horror I've kind of taken issue with, in the sense that it's a marketing term devised by publicists early on in the game to kind of easily categorize a kind of entertainment and market it to a specific audience. And so the expectations of what a horror movie is and the definitions of what a horror movie is and the constant fighting between this new wave of fandom as to what's a horror movie and what's not a horror movie. So my idea of what a horror movie is broadened. And I think when I was running Fangoria, for example, I took over Fango in 2009. And the first thing I did was pretty much just jump right in and start throwing weird stuff on that cover that I knew would kind of upset the status quo. And I would put weird stuff. Like I remember I put my third issue in, I think I put Black Swan on the front. And I blew it all out white. And it was nice. Natalie Portman's face right on the front, like dead center. And I got so much hate mail for that from fans saying that, I was killing Fangoria, that Black Swan is not a horror movie. And I welcomed that. So we'd have these open dialogues everywhere about, what is a horror movie? How do you define it? There's so many movies out there that are marketed as something else, and if you really take a close look, they're horror films. I mean, retroactively, I look at Taxi Driver, which is one of my favorite films of all time, and to me, that's probably one of the greatest horror films of the 1970s, although no one ever calls it a horror.
What makes it horror to you?
Well, it's the isolation of it. It's also borderline surreal. So it feels like it takes place in a nightmare world that is this dangerous, festering sore of a version of New York that only exists in the mind of this guy, and it's his complete breakdown. We never really get to know Travis Bickle. We're never quite sure what makes him tick, but we know he's ticking like a bomb, and we're just waiting for him to go off. And you couple that with the, Scorsese's kind of almost malevolence of the grime of that city, coupled with that Bernard Herrmann's final score, which is, to this day, I still drive around at night by myself listening to that soundtrack. And it's the greatest night driving music because it's just, the night just comes alive. Well, it not just keeps you awake. It's like you can really, just one of the great examples of music taking an innocuous image and transforming it completely into something malevolent. And the night becomes evil listening to that score. But I mean, you can find all. I remember walking out of the Toronto International Film Festival screening of Lars von Trier's Melancholia, and calling it the greatest horror film I'd seen in years, and knowing full well it wasn't a horror movie, or at least that's not what people would call it. But coming out of there feeling more dread and feeling more upset than I'd felt in watching any kind of franchise horror film in any recent years, or an Insidious film or something.
I'll ask again for this one too. What made this one horror for you?
Have you seen Melancholia? I mean, it's the approach. Chris? I mean, Tamir Von. Yeah.
I have not. No.
Yeah. So if you know Von Trier's movies, to me, I think he always makes horror films. He just pretends they're not.
I've heard Chris mention a couple of his in the past. Yes.
Well, I mean, he made one. Antichrist is that's him saying, "Yes, I'm making a horror movie." And what a horror movie! I almost walked on that movie. It upset me so much.
I will never look at a 2x4 the same way again.
Oh my god! Any of it? Like, I mean, I'll cite that as one of the greatest horror films of the millennia, but I'll never watch it again. I own it. It's never come out of its shrink wrap. I'll never watch it. I swear to you, I don't think I ever need to ever see that movie again because it bit me so hard.
Why?
But Melancholia was like this, this dark dream about this planet that's moving towards our planet. And it's this big blue planet, and it's echoed in the fact that Kristen Dunst is suffering from this deep depression, and she's isolated from everybody because she's so depressed. But at the end of it, she's the only one who kind of, because she's at peace with death and with she's the only one that can kind of comfort her family at the moment when the planet's going to be obliterated and everything is going to be destroyed. And it's very nihilistic, but it also has this kind of dark beauty to it, and danger. And I can't describe it. These are movies that you can't really articulate. It doesn't do them a great disservice. You have to experience them. And to see it on a gigantic screen like that, I literally felt like I was exiting into the gift shop back when I was a kid from the Wax Museum. You're in this other universe that's filled with menace and dread, and then you walk out and the sun's shining. You're like, huh? I mean, that's what I'm looking for in a movie. I'm looking to enter in another dimension that's going to change me. You know,
transcendence. Yeah, where it draws you in, where you no longer think I'm watching a screen that has a story on it. You're just
right. And I don't get that watching. I never really did slasher movies. I found there's no magic in those movies. I enjoyed them. I enjoy them. I'll cycle through the first 5 Friday the 13th. I love the 5th one every so often. But I never feel a sense of magic. I just I find them to be like amusing because they're pretty terrible. I know I'm gonna.
I'd say about 75% of slashers, you turn 75% of your brain off. It's not meant to be a thinker.
Yeah, slashers are like listening to some great old 50s garage rock with the 3 chords. And, you know exactly what you're gonna get. You're eating a McDonald's hamburger. You know exactly what you're gonna get. You don't hate yourself for it, but you don't remember it once you're finished with it.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about basically being drawn into this alternate universe or alternate reality so that when you come out of the theater, it's like walking into that gift shop. Do you see any common threads as to what does that for you?
Well, I think I'm always trying to find movies that do capture a kind of nightmare logic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
When I discovered Dario Argento, and again, Fulci's City of the Living Dead, these are movies that aren't operating by the logic of the natural world.
Yeah, that dream state.
Yeah, there's something else going on there, and sometimes they work. I always said, like, I remember seeing Hellraiser 2 when we rented, when one of our binges, we rented Hellraiser 2. And I thought visually it was, I still do think it's beyond words. It's incredible that the dusty labyrinth that hell's supposed to be in. The design of the Dr. Chenard and the whole mattress thing with Julia's rebirth, and what an incredible visual and oral experience of that Christopher Young score. And then as soon as the plot starts to kick in, it's garbage. And as soon as Ashley Lawrence starts to talk, it's like the dialogue, and it's just like, stop making the abnormal normal. Stop normalizing this incredible Baroque experience I'm having here. And so when I found the Italian stuff, I was like, oh wow, this is just I want to go there. Take me somewhere that doesn't exist, please. And don't explain things to me. I don't need to be explained because I won't revisit it. If you try to put logic on this, I won't come back. Leave it open-ended. Leave it weird, because then I'll think about it forever, and I'll keep wanting to go back to it to uncover more rocks that I missed the first time. Try to figure it all out. And if I never figure it all out, I'll just keep coming back. Which again is not to say I don't love I love all movies, man. I binge watch Elvis movies. I don't care. I love them. But when it comes right down to it, when it comes to the serious quest, that's the kind of stuff I'm looking for. I'm also looking for like filmmakers that, my favorite director of all time is Jess Franco, but I can't tell you that one Jess Franco movie I think is particularly great. Some aren't even watchable, but he's a director who's made hundreds of movies under dozens of pseudonyms, but they're also personal. He's like a down market, a Skid Row auteur, and so no matter what movie of his you'll watch, you'll see something there that's why people are so obsessed with him. Because you don't watch one Jess Franco movie, you have to watch them all to fully understand what made this guy tick. And so to me, that's really fascinating. Directors and filmmakers who are so personal with their works that they're leaving kind of a trail of breadcrumbs about their identity behind, that for us to decipher.
Let's see. No, well, actually, you did mention that there were different things that scare you now as an adult versus when you were younger. Do you know when any of the do you know particular things that scare you now that didn't scare you earlier?
The most base, boring things. Really, the older you get, the more death you experience. Legitimate death, obviously. Right. More people and especially during this past year, I think it's fast forwarded a lot of trauma for a lot of people. They've definitely aged. A lot of people their innocence has been obliterated pretty quickly in this past year, especially all the media saturation.
No shit.
But you get older, you realize you're closer to the end than you are at the beginning. You're on like this turnstile, and you're no longer at the beginning, and you can look behind you. You can see a longer line behind you than there is in front of you.
Yep.
And you start to go, oh, okay, well, that's okay. I got to make peace with this pretty soon because I don't know how much more time I got left.
Yeah.
But then people, start to go, and then, I'm a father of 3. I'm a single dad of 3 boys, and literally everything I do is for these guys. Now, I'm really lucky in the sense that my energy has kind of, I think, inspired them to be like my pals. Like we're all movie guys. They can do the same things now. They can tell you trivia about stuff that no one will do. So I mean, they're a great team, but the idea of anything happening to them is unthinkable.
Right.
That is my greatest fear, because I don't know how I'd ever exist. I don't know how it would ever happen. So because of that, you watch a movie where any kid gets killed. I mean, of course, it's going to fuck you up 10 times more than it did before you had kids.
Right.
Because that's your life now.
Exactly. It's like as you go into adult years, your fears in adult years are more occupational things like bills, taxes, death, loss of loved ones.
Yes, I mean those are the things that kind of pull you into the genre to begin with because it's an abstract. But
what is this lump on my neck? Yeah,
that's true. Then it's like, oh yeah, it's great to watch that guy get disemboweled back when I was 10. But now you're like, oh no, man, don't. I don't want to go to doctors. I don't want to know what's going on there. I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you look for different things. But at the end of the day, too, I mean, I'm all about aesthetics, right? So. I love Hammer horror. One of my favorite movies is 1960s Circus of Horrors, just because I love circuses. I love movies that take place in circuses. I love brightly colored, super Technicolor films. I love old 3D movies. I mean, so outside of all the chin stroking, deep thinking stuff, I love to get in the shitty carnival ride too and have a great time.
That's funny because I was about to ask if you liked the circus stuff for the potential alternate reality, but then you kind of took a left turn there and said no, that it was.
But I do. I love old circuit. Again, I collect 60s and 70s pinball machines because I love the fact that they've traveled the universes, been changed hands. They've been in arcades. They have people's scores etched in the sides of them. I love the art. I love the designs of them. I love the smell of them. But to me, it's that weird history, the seedy history of the pinball machines. I love all that stuff. And circuses are kind of like that too, because they travel from place to place to place. There's this weird kind of tribal thing, and they don't exist really anymore. So, and then also clowns are, you go into like Spirit Halloween at Halloween. That's another Halloween stop. I mean, it's not scary. You go into Spirit Halloween, there's clowns everywhere because Pennywise was so popular again with it. But they're always like these giant demon clowns with super fangs and like, like that's not scary. That bozo fucker from 1960 staring at me with this shiny grease paint, like handing me a balloon, looking all happy and cute, and like that is the diametric opposite of happy and cute. That is scary. That's the Gacy stuff.
I was just about to say Gacy, yeah.
Yeah. The safer, exactly. The safer it looks, the scarier it looks sometimes. The scarier it is to me.
So it's funny you briefly touched on Halloween. I was planning on asking if Halloween has changed for you now that you've got kids who might be more into it than you were.
It did initially because we built a little haunted house and had some fun and dry ice and fog. But it's I mean it's definitely fun. But again, we do. I've made a bunch of feature films, but they're very low budget, and my kids were raised on those sets, and they've been helping me out with carrying buckets of blood when they were like 5 or 6, and
awesome,
and doing all this stuff, and their friends. And I run this convention, Horror-Rama, and so they've been like raised hanging out with all these guys. My son Jack, who's was 12. We didn't do Horror-Rama this past year, obviously, because everything was shut down. But the year prior, we brought in Lamberto Bava and Giretta from Demons, and my son Jack was. He's really gotten into DJing. He was only 12, and he was DJing that show. And there he is spinning the Demons soundtrack, and Bava's and Giretta are dancing together in front of him. I'm like, do you have any concept how fucking cool this is?
Right.
What you got going on right now? That stuff I've laid at your feet. Like you're gonna look back and go, holy smokes! I was front row seat to this stuff. So Halloween to us is like there are bigger things. There are bigger things throughout the year. I mean, Halloween to them is the bottom line is the most exciting thing because they can just get a bunch of candy. It's a candy grab. It's a raid. It's a raid.
when Halloween is the same thing as every other day. The only difference is candy.
Getting towards the end here, we've got a couple questions that are going to apply to your life overall, not just any one area. The first two I'm going to ask, I'll tell you both of them in advance so you can understand why I'm asking them, because there might be different answers. But the first two questions we want to ask are, what movie have you watched more times than any other? And what movie would you say is your favorite movie? Because they might be two different things.
Not really. I mean, Dawn of the Dead for sure is my, to me, Dawn of the Dead. And you know, George Romero moved to Toronto in 2004 when he made Land of the Dead, and he married a local girl.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he was like lived down the street from me, and I was lucky enough to, you know, drink scotch with George, you know, a couple times a month, and become really close with him. And I have all these, like, you know, I published a bunch of Romero interviews in magazines, but I have like acres of interviews because I'd record everything, because the more he drank, you know, he would write at night. He'd always write, and then you get over there and he'd wrap up whatever he was writing, maybe a comic book or a screenplay that he didn't sell, and he'd start sipping some scotch. But after a few pops, he'd call them pops. He'd you know, you'd turn on the device and he'd let you, and he'd tell you something, and he'd just go, and it was the best. It really was the best.
So what you're saying is we should have liquored you up first.
No, not at all. I just, you know, my love of Dawn of the Dead is so, you know, comes from being that kid, seeing it at the right time, giving me the night terrors for the year, and then keep wanting to revisit it that way. It's come from sharing it with other people and saying what an incredible film it is, and then turning them onto it and feeling kind of responsible for this thing and making sure people knew it. And then it's coming of age as an adult, and having access to all these people that you loved so much, and then suddenly George moving down the street from you and having a friendship with them, and then learning about the secrets behind this stuff firsthand. And you know, George even built a statue of me where he's holding my severed head. It's on my mantle.
Nice.
Yeah, it's on my mantle. It's unbelievable. It's this one-shot deal. We made the statue, and he's holding my head, and he had to 3D scan me and everything else. So my passion for Dawn of the Dead is on so many different levels. But at the end of the day, Dawn of the Dead to me is a perfect film because it's so many different films. It's a great war film. It's a great human drama. It's a great apocalypse story. It's a great action film. It's a great social commentary. It's a startling gore opera. I mean, it's like unbelievable. And it's a great scary horror film. It's a comedy. I mean, it's a very, very funny movie. Yeah. So, and then there's 3 different cuts of the goddamn thing. So you have different, you know, experiences with it depending on which slightly different version you watch. And that I can't get enough of that movie. I can watch Dawn of the Dead every day of my life. I will never ever get sick of Dawn of the Dead ever. So Dawn is the one. Sir,
I'm going to have to stop you there. You're blowing my co-host's mind.
What?
Why is that your favorite?
No, just I can hear the background noise of, you know, the things that you're talking about, like the statue with George Romero, you know, holding your head.
No, I just gotta say, if you hear a little high pitched tone in the background, that's actually my jealousy meter hitting clip.
Pinging.
You know, I'm jealous of myself. Okay, so it's like
because you lived so many dreams, from going to, you know, collecting Fangoria magazine as a kid to being the editor in chief. And then later on, hanging out with George Romero, drinking scotch, and he made a statue of you?
He made a statue of me, the two of us together, holding my severed head upside down. But he actually paid his DP at Adam Swick to do a 3D scan of me, so it was accurate. I mean, it was just like, what? It was what's going on? I know, but it's funny when I say these things.
That is fantastic.
George passed a few years ago, and sometimes, you know, you watch Dawn of the Dead, I forget that was my life, and you live a few lives like that. Sometimes you forget that it's true, and then you say it, and you're like, oh wow. And then I get jealous of myself until I realize that it actually happened.
Right.
And, wait, that was me. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it is really cool, you know, and I don't take any of it for granted. And you know, and there's a reason for all those kind of good things happening to me in that way, is that, you know, I think I'm somewhat talented, but it's beyond that. It's that I never let that fire die. I mean, I've never put this stuff on the shelf, and I've never wanted to just be a spectator. I've wanted to be involved in some way. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more. And so and my philosophy is always that if it exists in the natural world, it's accessible.
Reach out.
Yeah. So I always, and to this day still, I mean, I have stories about, like, you know, Nicolas Cage inviting me to his private island in the Bahamas and chopping up a snail so I can eat its penis, and trying to get me to getting me drunk and trying to get me to enact a voodoo ceremony with a rooster that wandered onto the courtyard. And
were you guys trying to reenact Angel Heart or something? Like what the?
No, it was weird. Like that was like I've always loved Cage. To me, Cage is like an expressionist film actor, and what I loved about Cage is that he can do like the weird stuff like Vampire's Kiss, which is overtly weird, but then he hides in like romantic comedies and dramas. But if you watch him, he's always the same weird fucker. It's like he's like this foreign element. It's like someone's poured it in like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari and dropped it in the middle of like leaving Las Vegas. Right. And it's like it's always been strange to me. So when I was writing Fango, it turned out he was a huge fan of the mag, and I'd interviewed him a couple times prior to that, but he reached out and they were getting ready to release Ghost Rider 2. And I liked the first one enough. I love the comics. The first one was I liked it enough to say okay. And he said, "Look, I'm in the Bahamas next week. You want to come down and let's hang out and talk about movies?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I literally just got on a plane.
Say no to that? There's no no to that.
There's no no to that. You just get on a plane and you go and I had I had a private map when I landed in the Bahamas. I slept in this shitty hotel and got up the next morning and had this map where I had to follow to like the bowels of the docks and like the worst part of it. And I had to look for this one specific dock, and his manservant came by with a boat and said, "Get in the boat." And I said, "Where are you going to take me?" He's like, "See my boss." I'm like, "Who's your boss?" Like, "Nicolas Cage." I'm like, "All right." We get on the boat. We go to his island, and there he is with he had a big beard. Anyways, we go to his courtyard, and he had all these Hammer horror movies spread out all over his table. And he said, "I'm doing this for you. It's all for you. It's for Fangoria. It's for our love of horror."
You do that very well.
Like, yeah. I'm like, "Well," I was like, "Well, what do you do when Entertainment Weekly's comes over?" And he's like, "They're not invited." And we spent the whole day just getting drinking red wine, and he had prepared this huge feast. And we mostly just talked about Terrence Fisher, because he wanted at that point to remake Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. But and Roger Corman, because he was at that point he really wanted to be the next Vincent Price. That's what he went. I think in a weird way he's becoming that.
I was just going to say he's still got a chance.
Yeah.
Well, because he's really at that point. That's another time I got in trouble because I said, "Well, fuck it, he's going on the cover," and we put him on. I put him on the cover of Fango and a 2-part interview, and I called him Nicolas Cage, the master of horror. And some people got it, a lot of people didn't, and some of the old school guys. I remember one guy making a mock-up cover to like burn me, and had Abe Vigoda on the front, and it said, "Abe Vigoda, master of horror." But if you read the interview, I mean, we got letters of Quentin Tarantino bought it and said it's the best, one of the best interviews he's ever read, and we really got into the guts of the genre.
Doubt we'd ever get him on the show, but it's making me wonder what answers he would have to some of these questions that we ask.
Oh my God, we got to get Nicolas Cage on the show.
They're great answers. I mean, just note that they're really great answers.
I'm sure.
Right? I mean, and we talking about in the lives he's led. Remember, he's raised in this industry, and hanging out as a little boy with Klaus Kinski. I mean, not many people can tell you little innocuous stories about hanging out with Klaus Kinski.
Let's get back to. I just got a few more questions about you. Do you see any common threads about what kind of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical, zombie? I think you said. I
like Romero zombies, and I like Italian zombies. I'm burned out on zombies. I think everybody in their right mind is, because we talk about horror being kind of the ugly little brother of cinema. It's now become pretty mainstream. I mean, let's be honest. It's Walking Dead, the kind of stuff that was X-rated when I was a kid is now on TV at 9 o'clock on network television. But I'm just burned out on a lot of that stuff. But I think the big driving force through all my movies, I like just like really just weird shit. Sometimes I don't even like horror. I like weird shit and the exploration of finding stuff that just doesn't behave normally. But I like the really, really, really weird shit. I don't like senseless gore for gore's sake. I like gore used as either like the point of the exercise or as a tool. To me, a movie can be G-rated and still be frightening.
So it's kind of funny. Normally, the last question that we ask here, I think you've already kind of answered it, but normally what we do is we'll narrow down on whatever it is that you enjoy and then ask why horror, because aren't there other avenues from which you might be able to find sources of these same things? And in your case, exploring weird shit, you said yourself, you do seek it outside of horror. So I don't know where to go with that.
Is that a question? I mean, no, it's a statement.
Yeah.
But I know tied for first place is certainly Dawn of the Dead and Charles Lawton's Night of the Hunter, which some people have called it a horror movie. Some people say it's not a horror movie. But to me, that represents what I'm looking for as far as horror in the genre, in other genres, pretending to be something else. I don't know if you've ever seen that film, but to me, everything I love about the genre is alive and thriving in that thing. But it also has so much more than just a simple exercise in horror. But I can say that about Dawn of the Dead too. So, to me, I don't know why we have to pigeonhole some of this stuff. It's just hallmark of a great film.
Yeah.
Moving away from horror, then I'm wondering, is it a general interest in intellectualism? Is it?
Well, I'm definitely. I don't be so bold as to call myself an intellectual, but it's it's all kinds of things. I can't even say it's one thing. I do watch movies on an intellectual level, but then I'm very happy turning my brain off and just enjoying junk food. I have no problem with that.
True.
But I think it comes down to, like, you can have junk food, but there can still be something amazing and incredible and daring and beautiful and weird and edgy, alive and well in that piece of junk food that makes it stand out from the other shit. It's just, I hate the expression "so bad it's good," because even in the worst films, I think you can find a moment, and there's a reason why Ed Wood is celebrated, because there's an auteurism there, but you'll find like these little moments that are so sublime. And I'm okay with watching like any film if there's 1 second of that picture. I don't care how much I dislike the picture. If there's one moment, scene, sequence, a marriage of music and a visual, a performance, something that sticks with me, then I'll give that movie a pass, because it's talked to me on a certain kind of level that other movies aren't talking to me on.
Something about the way you worded the last couple moments made me feel like maybe intellectualism wasn't the right word. Maybe art is a better word.
Well, but art, analyzing art is also intellectual. Using your mind in any way.
Which is exactly what I was going to say. Yes. Intellectualism can be a part of art, but art is more than intellectualism, if that makes sense.
Well, again, and sometimes it's great. But I mentioned like the Fulci stuff, which there's no plot. There is, but it's very clumsy, and it's not even there. Guys like Fulci and Mario Bava, the Italians, the Europeans, kind of just shrugged off plot. It was not that interesting to them. What's interesting to them is to build a weird universe. And again, those movies do kind of bypass your brain and go right to your guts, and you experience them viscerally. Then it rebounds back to your brain, and then you're trying to decipher why you were reacting that way to that picture. So it becomes, even though the movie's not an intellectual film,
right,
it becomes an intellectual exercise when you're
trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't think what's
by nature an intellectual process.
Yeah. I can't think of the guy's name, but there's one musician that's very well known for what I'm about to say, Daniel something or other. But, there are musicians that there's like an amateur almost vibe going on, but then other people who are very well-known artists in a particular field will go back and look at that and love it and try to tear it apart and go, how do I go back to sound like I don't know what I'm doing? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't. And that's the thing. I mean, you can't imitate, you can't duplicate what comes organically. Right. I mean, you just can't. I mean, that's why I love Jess Franco. He used to call his movies, and the passion for movies is that first draft cinema. There's kind of like a first draft. You don't overthink things too much. You dive in there and you shoot what you feel. You have this kind of innate sense of what you want to focus on. I mean, to me, that's the stuff that changes the world. When you overprocess it and overthink it, it loses so much of that energy. When you try to duplicate, I mean, look at like something like Eraserhead, which before Eraserhead there was no Eraserhead. There was nothing like it. Mm-hmm. You can see so many movies after Eraserhead of guys trying to go back there and duplicate that and imitate that, and it never quite works. They call it Lynchian, or it's like, but it's never quite the same. Even Lynch himself, when he tries to kind of go back and quote some of that stuff, it doesn't quite work because he's playing with too much money and there's too many people involved. It has to be somewhat mainstream, so he has to make some sacrifices.
Right. Well, I think we got quite a bit of interesting stuff there. I mean, if I were to sum it up, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I mean, the reoccurring themes that I'm hearing from this call, like I say, it's the exploration of the art and of the unknown.
Yeah, it's everybody's got whatever they have as their lantern to guide them through life. And mine and so many others, it's cinema. Well, cinema and music, but to me, cinema is music, and they're all it's all the liberal arts into one. But it's the history of cinema, it's the passion for it, and it's been a constant with me since I was, like I said, since I've had a memory, and it will be till the day I die. It's been my greatest companion to help figure out the natural world. I mean, that's and my own experiences reacting to the world. It's my religion, it's my philosophy, it's everything that I need, all packaged into one little thing. So, yeah, that's never going to change. There's no way.
No reason for it to.
No.
Well, we do very much appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and entertaining us.
Yeah, thanks. I said I wasn't going to last the whole run, but it looks like I did. Yeah. And that's why, man, I'm glad you stopped it there, because I can feel my vocal cords starting to like atrophy. So it's good. It's getting dry. It's getting dry.
Yep. Well, just real quick, up to you. Do you want to, closing pitch on anything that you're working on?
Well, I mentioned the movie at the top that I'm going to post on, and there's some stuff coming out of Full Moon. We're creating this whole new imprint that I'm going to be responsible for, which this edgier string. Charlie Band, he was one of the pioneers of home video, and back in the early 80s, he created a label called Wizard Video, and all those giant, beautiful, big boxes. He was one of the first people to import Jess Franco and Jean Roland movies into the mainstream video store markets with these incredible boxes that are now worth so much money. But that was my heart and soul, And so this little project that we'll be doing is creating a series of smaller films that are pretty much faithful in spirit and tone to some of those edgier video store European horror cult films. So, but there's no point in getting into that now because we haven't quite figured out the language of it. But I think the best thing to do is go to my website. It's chrisalexanderonline.com, and that has pretty much all my records, my movies, news, and all that crap. So,
all right.
All the stuff and the spiels are all stuck into that little space.
Right. And we'll put together a bio for you and link to stuff, whatever. I'll get together with you offline and talk about that.
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And thank you to anybody out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We have a list there of who we've interviewed and who we're looking to interview. If you know any of those people and can help us connect, or if you want to have somebody added to the list who's not on there, let us know. You can also become a Patreon subscriber, link to social media, what have you. Just come let us know how we're doing. horrormakesushappy.com.